Good morning, everyone. It's Katrina from the Alluring Bead Boutique, and welcome back to my membership channel. Today we're going to learn to make this beautiful kaleidoscope pendant. I made this pendant quite a while ago, and I wrote a pattern out for it. And the pattern is available on my website, thealluringbeadboutique.com, in the shop. And if you don't want to participate in my membership program, you can always purchase the pattern over there. This project is done in 3 parts. The first part is to create this ring here using herringbone stitch. And to accomplish that, I used 8/0 and 11/0 seed beads to form a beautiful little ring. Then we come along the outside edge and we'll do some stitch in the ditch. Then we'll come back through and add these beautiful little pearl accents. The next part of the video, of the project, is going to be to create a bezel for a 14mm Rivoli. And we will be using some right angle weave and a few modified techniques to create the bezel. Then in part 3, we will come back and connect the bezel to the outer ring. I absolutely love this little pendant. I'm amazed that I haven't ever repeated it because it came out really pretty. I just have it on a piece of silk cord here. But it could just as easily be used, you can use the exact same concept to create not only a necklace, but you could use it for earrings or even a brooch as well. So let's go ahead and we'll take a look at the materials and see what it takes to make this kaleidoscope pendant. First up, we're going to need a 14mm Swarovski Rivoli. And these that I'm using today are called Twilight. It's a custom coating 14mm Swarovski crystal. And I got these from Fusion a long time ago. You're going to need some 8/0 seed beads. I'll be using today some higher metallic amethyst. And for my 11/0s, I'm going to be using the Galvanized Permanent Finish Starlight by Toho. I have the same thing in a 15/0 seed bead. And I also have a couple of other colors of 15/0s out here, which I might alternate and use a little bit differently than from what I did in this pattern. The ones I really like so far are this light amethyst gold luster. I'm going to lay those out. And I also got out these silver-lined roslyn 15/0s. And I'm just going to lay those to the side because basically what I'm doing is I'm actually designing as I go with my color concepts. And then the other thing you're going to need are some 4mm pearls. I don't really have the 4s in the color I like, but I'm going to try shooting for these 5mm. And these are just a Preciosa crystal pearl. 5mm, and they are the light burgundy, and they're really pretty, and I think they look really good with these choices that I've picked out here. All right, so what the basics, most basic you will need is your Rivoli, 8/0s, 11/0s, and one color of 15/0s, and your pearls. For tools, I am just going to go ahead and be using some 6-pound Fireline in the black satin. And I'm going to use a size 11 beading needle because we're going to have to make several passes through some small beads here on this bezel. And then it's also a pretty tight fit when we go to sew the bezel to the outer ring. So you want a needle that can get through your beads several times, so the thinner the better. And the thread as well. If you don't have 6, you could probably even get away with using 4, but I would not suggest going above 6. You'll need some scissors or a thread burner. And let's go ahead and I'll set out my materials and we'll get started on part 1 of this project, which is the herringbone, tubular herringbone ring. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get started on our herringbone base. And in order to do this, we're just going to create a small 4-bead strip of ladder stitch. We're going to join it together, and then we'll start our tubular herringbone. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up 2 8/0s, pass back through the first one to position those beads side by side. Then I am going to pass down through the second bead, back up through the first bead, and then I am going to come down through my second bead again. I'm only going to leave myself a little small tail because once I get to the end of my tube, I am going to stitch the two ends together, and this thread will pretty much take care of itself. So now I'm going to pick up, I've got my 2 8/0s on. I'm going to pick up an 11/0. I'm coming out of the bottom of my second 8/0 there. I'm going to pass through from top to bottom to put my little 11/0 right beside the 8/0. And then I'm going to step up into that 11/0. I'll come in just a little bit. We'll repeat that one more time. I'm picking up an 11/0. Now my working thread is exiting the top of that 11/0, so I'll come through this time from the bottom. And that's just ladder stitch. Then once I get my bead into position, I will pass my needle down through that second 11/0 I just added. And this is all I really need for my base. So now we're going to form this into a tube. I have my working thread exiting the bottom of my 11/0. I'm going to take my needle and pass up through the very first 8/0. And as I pull this together, I'm going to pull it around into a little tubular shape, just like that. Now to secure this, I need to add a thread bridge here between these two beads at the top. So all I need to do is take my needle and pass right back down that 11/0 one more time. It's a little hard to hold on to until you get that last thread bridge in place. Then we're going to come right back up our first 8/0 one more time. And we are ready to start our tubular herringbone. This is what your work should look like. All right, so now we're just going to do herringbone stitch, a tubular herringbone stitch. So we're going to work with our 8/0s first. We're going to pick up 2. We're going to pass down the next 8/0. We're going to position the beads. You have to turn your work around just a little bit. And we're going to step up through the 11. Now this is the entire round each time is only 2 stitches. So now we're going to pick up 2 11s, pass down the next 11. And because we're at the end of the row, make sure your beads sit the way you want them to. Now we have to step up through 2. So at the end of each round, we'll be stepping up through 2 beads, just like that. And all I'm going to do for the next few minutes is keep doing those same exact stitches until we have a total of 30 beads or 30 rows of beadwork done. So this is basically just repetitious. We're just going to repeat exactly what we've been doing. Tubular herringbone, we're going to pick up 2 8/0s, position the beads, turn the work, step up through 1, pick up our 2 11s, pass down the next 11, just a top bead, position those, and then step up through 2, like that. And those look really pretty together, and so I think I made a pretty good choice on my color options for this particular tutorial. And we're just going to keep working. If you have trouble keeping up with the number of beads that and rows that you're working on, you can count out the beads that you need. So let me show you guys what I'm talking about after I finish stepping up here. So I have 4 rows completed here. How do I know this? Because I can count that I have 4 beads. Let me get my tail thread out. So I have 4 beads, so that's 4 rows already. So what I mean by counting out is that I would pick up another 26 beads. There's 10, I think. 4, 6, 8, 9, 10. And then I need to get 10 more, and then 6. Five and 6. So these are my, all I'm doing is counting out my starting bead for the next 26 rows. So basically what I will do for each additional round now is I will pick up a bead here and then my second bead here. And that way I will know I have exactly 30 rows. And I don't have to be frustrated by trying to count out these tiny little rows each time. And then just carry on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and go off camera. I think you guys should pretty much have this down, what we're doing. Each time you get to the end of the row, remember to step up through the 2 8/0s before you proceed. And I'll meet you guys back when I get this little strip done, and we will put our 2 ends together. I just want to jump back in and show you guys how beautiful this looks, and talk about a couple little things. The way that we were able to turn this tubular herringbone shape into a round is by using the 2 different size beads, and you can see already how my curve is starting to form. And so this is the look that you're going for. You want this to curve all the way around so that we can create this beautiful little round form and frame for our bezel. My 30 rows completed, and let's take a look at what we've got before we stitch this together. So when I bring my 2 ends around, and that is my 14mm crystal sitting in the middle, here's what you will notice, that there's a little tiny bit of space in there, but it does accommodate this crystal. And if you'll notice how I've got this stitched together, it is kind of raised. You see how the back part of the bezel is sort of indented, and the top part of the bezel is raised up like a layer cake almost. So that's what we're shooting for. If you were to use a smaller crystal or a larger crystal, obviously you would have to adjust these rows. That is a 16mm crystal right there. And as you can see, it does fit around, but it's not going to hold that. In other words, we won't have any room to work inside to connect the bezel to the ring. And same difference, you would have to add a few more, but of course you would need an even number of rows. Same thing, if you went smaller, you would have to use less rows, but you would still want an even number of rows. So now what we're going to do is we are going to sew our 2 ends together. And I've worked myself pretty short on thread. So once I finish this part, I will have to rethread and show you, maybe I can show you guys how to weave in for the next step in creating this outer ring. So anyhow, here we are, and I have added my last set of 11/0s and stepped up through the top 2 8/0 beads. So now here's my thread exiting to this side of the beadwork, the back side. I'm going to bring these around, and I am going to sew straight across through. I don't know, you can go through as many as you want. I'm just going to pick a number and go through 3. I'm going to pull it down, pull it together. I am going to come over into the 3 beads on this side. You'll see here that my thread is going to suck in between those 2 beads right there. I am going to pull a little bit further, and I am going to sew across 2 or 3 beads on the opposite side. So all we're doing is connecting our beads. And you kind of want to watch out for your tail threads. You don't want it to get sewn up in here. And mine is a little bit caught. There we go. Let me pull it out of the way. So once I've gotten those beads in place, what I want to do is I just want to reinforce that. So I'm going to come back through, sew back across the gully again. This time I only went through 1. I'm going to step over to the bead right beside the one I'm coming out of. I am going to sew back across through a couple, just to get back across that little gap again. So now we need to stitch these inside beads together, and you can see that my thread is exiting this bead right here. I need to come down. I'm going to count how many. That's like 2 beads down. You can see there's my gap. 1, 2. I'm exiting the second bead. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew up through the second to the last bead here of the 11 O's plus the last bead. Now I'm going to sew across 2 beads on the other side. I'm going to pull my 11 O's together. Now I'm going to basically, I want to come through the hole, and I want to make sure that I can see where my thread is exiting. You see where the thread is exiting that bead? I'm going to pull it straight across onto the other side. And it's pretty easy to see because I haven't connected those beads. I'm going to sew up through the 2 beads on this side of my hoop. So I'm going to sew up through those 2 11s. And then I'm going to sew through the 2 on the opposite side of my little gully right there. And pull. And make sure that you don't get your tail thread hung up in there. I think I do have it hung, so I'm just going to pick it out. There we go. Now I can pull that across. And my beads are all connected. So what I want to do is I want to come back through the center. And then I'm going to go ahead and cut off this tail thread. Because basically I've connected those beads. And I really don't need to tie a knot on that or do anything special to it. Alright, so I'm coming back through. Let's see where I am here. Actually, I'm going to stay on this side. So I am exiting from that second gold bead. I am going to come across, come back up through the 2 beads above it. So I'm exiting here. I'm going to jump up to the 8. And I am going to sew back across just like this. It doesn't matter where I come out. I just want to go through those 8s. And get myself positioned on the outside of my ring. And there we have connected our tubular herringbone into this cute little wheel. So right now my thread is really short, so I am going to basically have to weave this thread off. I'm going to take a look at which bead I'm coming out of. I'm exiting this bead in this direction. So all I really need to do is weave back and forth through my outer row just a couple of times to secure that thread. And I already have, weaved back and forth a few times, just connecting my rows. So I'm just going to go down a few, up a few, down a few, making sure that I'm using the beads that are beside each other. Then I'm going to go up a few more, and I'm going to come to the center and end my thread on the inside. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and do that now. I'm going to come right down through these beads. Here's the bead I'm exiting. I need to go through the corresponding 11 0 below, which is right there. And I'm going to pass through some beads, take my needle off, and end my thread. And since I had woven so many times through connecting my ring, I don't have to worry about that thread pulling loose. It's all nice and secure. So I need to thread my needle, folks, and I will be right back. There are several ways that you can add an end thread in a beading project. Now, I've got my another wingspan of thread onto my needle. I'm going to show you guys a really easy way to add thread. I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to pass under the thread bridges that are between these 2 8/0 seed beads. And I know I'm under the thread bridge because I can't pull my needle out. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this all the way through nice and slow until I have myself a little bit of a tail. I don't need much because I'm going to tie a knot. So I'm going to take my tail end of my thread and I'm going to pass it around and form an underhand loop. And when I pull this knot down, you'll see I want it to fall in between those same 2 8/0 beads where I stuck my needle to begin with. And I'm going to tie 2 of those. And I'm going to pull those knots just right down in there. I am going to take my needle and I'm going to pass through either one of those 8/0s. Just pick a direction and go in one of them. And I'm going to pull away from my knots. I'm going to move away from that knot. I'm going to tuck that little knot. When I pull like that, I can feel it cinch inside of that 8/0 seed bead. So now I can cut off the tail. If you don't have really sharp scissors, which these are metal, sheet metal cutting scissors that I ordered offline, and they cut this fire line really well. If you don't have really sharp scissors, you run the potential of leaving a shredded little end showing on your beadwork. These scissors happen to work really great. If you don't have really sharp scissors, you might want to invest in a thread zapper, because you can get in really close with the tip of these things and it will burn the thread off. Because we're working with a hoop, it really doesn't matter where we start for the next part of the project. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be adding a little stitch in the ditch. We're going to use our 11/0 beads for that. So on this pendant, I used 13 pearls to accent around. I could have potentially probably have fit another pearl in here and here for a total of 15. But this go round, I'm using a slightly larger pearl. So I'm going to stick with the number 13. So what that means is, in order to situate the pearls between my stitch and the ditch beads, I'm going to need a total of 14 11/0s in order to sew 13 pearls in between them. So my working thread is exiting right here and going in that direction. So I'm going to pick up an 11/0, and I'm going to come through instead of the bead right in front of where my thread is exiting, I'm going to come through the one beside it here on the other side, plus an extra 8/0. When I pull that through, you'll see how it positions my 11/0 right in that little ditch. I'm going to repeat that 13 more times. So now my working thread is exiting this bead to the front. I'm going to, instead of going into this bead right in front of it, I'm going to come across the ditch and go into that bead plus 2 more. And that's all I'm going to do. 12 more times until I have 14 11/0s sitting in the ditch. I'll show you one more. I'm going to pick up my 11/0. So now my working thread is exiting from this 8/0. I will count up 1 and come across to the one beside it and go through 2. Just like that. Don't pull these super tight. Just get them positioned in there just nice and neat, and not loose but not super tight. All right, so now I'm exiting from this bead. I'm going to go forward 1 and come across to the bead on the other side and go through that bead plus 1 more. Pinch my beads a little too tight, so those 2 beads right there. All right, so I'm going to keep working until I have my 14 beads on. So now I've got my little 14th bead added, and my thread is exiting right here. But as you can see, because as we sewed back and forth, our beads kind of sit a little bit catty corner. So let's straighten them up. What I'm going to do is I'm going to flip my work over so that now my working thread is closer to me. I'm going to sew back through the 2 beads on this side. I am going to come through this 11/0 from the back side there. Pull my thread. Then I am going to sew through the next 2 8/0s here on this side. And then I'm going to zigzag back and forth. So now I'm going to come through the 11/0 on this side and sew across. You can see that it's straightening up my beads nice. So now I need to come through the 11/0 back across, and that's all I'm going to do until I get all the way down to the last bead. Come through the next 2 8s and so on. So let me go ahead and finish straightening these up. You guys straighten yours up, and I will meet you back and we'll carry on with the next step. So basically I have sewn all the way back around, and I'm exiting that 11-0. So I need to come through the next 4 8-0s here on this side. My thread is exiting to that side of the 11-0. So I'll come through the 4 8-0s on that side. Then I am going to just go ahead and step right up into my 11-0 right there. And I'm going to pull this around and try to pull this bead so that it faces the way that I want it to, which is straight forward. So now I'm just going to come through and add my pearls. To do that, we're just going to simply pick up a pearl and sew into the next 11. We were exiting an 11. We're going to pick up our pearl and we're going to sew through. And don't worry if they seem a little bulky. We're going to fill in between them in the next step. So just do that. Keep sewing in your pearls. And these Preciosa pearls, they have tiny little holes. They're a little bit hard to pick up, but we'll get through it. You don't have to use pearls. You can use any size 4mm bead that you want. You can use crystals. It doesn't really matter. It's up to you. I like the look of the pearl, so I'm going to stick with that. And I will continue on until I have placed a pearl in between each of my 11-0s in the ditch. And I'll meet you back. So I added my last pearl and my working thread is exiting the 11-0. I'm just going to come through the next 8-0. I'm going to make sure my thread doesn't get hung up on this pearl, which I'm pretty sure that it just did, so I have to pick it back out. So I was able to rescue that and make sure that my thread didn't get hung up on that pearl. So now I'm exiting this 8-0 right here. I'm going to come back through the 8-0 right next to it in the opposite direction. I am going to sew back up into the 11 and the pearl. So I come through the 11 first, and then I'm going to go through the pearl. And this is a good instance as to why I said to use a smaller needle, because it's getting pretty tight in my those gold 11-0s already. So now I just want to come through my pearl right here. And then I'm going to come back through and I'm going to add a bead in between each of these pearls. But because my pearls are a little bit larger than the ones I used on my previous component, I'm going to have to check to see if an 8-0 is going to fit or if I need to drop it down to an 11. So I'm going to pick up an 8 and come through my next pearl. And I'm going to see if I like the way that it looks. And it fits pretty good, but it could get tight as I move through these beads, so I'm just not going to pull that super tight. I'm going to pick through my little 8-0s here and find some of the smaller ones that I can find. And I'm just going to go through and sew one in between each of my pearls. Like that. And when I get around to this side, I will come back and we'll talk about adding a bail to our ring. So I ran into a problem. First up, I had used this pearl here that has a really bad place on it. So I had to backtrack. I took out my 8-0s that I was placing in between the beads, and I pulled off and replaced that pearl, and I've come back through. And then I also decided that putting an 8 between my pearls, I'm sorry guys, I don't know why my light is not focusing so much here. I don't like the look of the 8, so I'm going to come back through and I'm going to add 11s between my pearls. Once you add the last bead in between your pearls and you pass through the last pearl, move on through that next 11-0. And then it doesn't really matter which side or column that you choose, but you're going to go through one of your 8-0s, the very next 8-0. And that will get us in position to add our bail. Make sure that you don't let your thread get hung up on your pearls. Okay, so this is where we are, and it looks pretty good. I'm pretty happy with it. I like my color combos, and everything is looking really well. So my thread is on the right side here of my beadwork. I'm going to pick up 2 11s, an 8, and 2 11s. I am going to skip 2 8-0s and sew through the third. We had 4 beads in the center there, that which we did not, put a stitch in the ditch bead here in the center, because we wanted to leave room to add our bail. So now I'm exiting this 8-0. I am going to come to the 8-0 right beside it on the other side of the beadwork and pass my needle through, making sure my thread doesn't hang up on anything. I am going to pick up 2 11s, and I am going to sew back through just my 8-0 bead here, back in the opposite direction, just like that. This is what you should have, 2 sets of 11s sitting on the side of your 8-0. Then I'm going to pick up 2 more 11s, and I am going to sew through. I'm going to skip over and sew through that 4th bead, the one I started from in this round, on the other side. I started from this 8-0. I'm sewing through the one on this opposite column, back in the opposite direction. When I pull my beads, then I have the same look on this side. So this is what the front looks like, and the back looks exactly the same, just like that. And now we have that cute little 8-0 sitting here at the top of our beadwork. And now I want you guys to just reinforce that. So we're exiting from this 8-0. We need to come across to the 8-0 on the other side and sew up through our beads again. Follow the exact same thread path. I'm exiting this 8-0 on the right. I'm sewing in the opposite direction through the 8-0 on the left. That's right beside of it. And I'll put my thumb over here to make sure my thread doesn't hang up on anything, including that little 11 down there. So make sure you're not hanging up on anything. Come through the 2 11s on this side. This is your chance to secure everything up and make it look nice. Come through the 8. Come down through the 2 11s on the same side of the beadwork, which I was working on the left. Then I'm going to pass through the 8-0 underneath, just the 8-0 on the left. I'm going to sew back in the opposite direction through the corresponding 8-0 on the right. Once again, making sure my thread doesn't hang up on my accent beads. Now I'm going to come up through the 2 11s on this side, on the right hand side. Come back through my 8. And then down the 2 beads on the right hand side, the 2 11-0s. And then the 8-0 here on the base, on the right. So now let's take a look at our sample. On the sample, I sewed back up one more time into my 8-0 and created a little loop of beads using 11s and 8s here at the top. And that was the purpose of that, was so that I could run a jump ring through. You can do that now. You could do it later. You could simply just pass one jump ring through your 8-0 and then another jump ring going the other way, like this. I could pass a jump ring here in place of these beads and then add one more jump ring for my cording or my chain to go through. So I'm going to leave off that part right now. You guys can go ahead and add a little loop of beads. Let me tell you how many I put. I picked up an 11 and an 8. Let's see, I picked up 11, 8, 11, 8, 11, 8, 11, 8, 11. To make that little loop of beads right there. So I started with an 11 and I ended with an 11. And then just reinforce it. And then we're going to sew back down. We're going to go ahead and end our thread. So I was exiting that 8-0 bead. I'm going to move through just one more 8-0. Then I'm just going to tie some half-hitch knots right here along this inside edge of my 8-0s. So I'm going to pass my needle under the thread, bridge between the two 8-0 C beads, there where my thread is situated. I'm going to pull till I have that small loop. I'm going to pick up my loop with my needle, and then I'm going to pull that knot down in between those two 8-0 beads. I'm going to move through a couple of more of my 8-0s, and I'm going to repeat that. I'm just going to do probably about a total of 3. So there was 1. So now I'm going to grab my thread bridge in there, push my needle right under those threads. And you'll feel it when your needle grabs it. Come through the loop with the needle. Pull that knot in right between the same two beads where your working thread is situated. Let's do one more. Doesn't matter how many beads you pass down. Just pass down some of your 8s. It's the easiest place to do your half-hitch knots. And come through that next thread bridge. Come under it. Make sure you're staying on the same side of your pendant hoop. Pass through the little hoop and pull the knot in. And then make sure that you always move away from your knot, your last knot, before you end the thread. So I'm going to go ahead and end this thread. Because I have my ultra sharp scissors, I'll just use those. And so there we have finished up part 1 of the Kaleidoscope pendant. Now this little component is beautiful all in of itself. You can do a lot of different things to embellish the inside of this if you so choose. In the next part, we're going to create a beaded bezel for the 14mm crystal that we're going to insert in the center. And then in part 3, I'm going to come back and I'm going to show you guys how to connect the two pieces together. Well, our finished pendant is going to look like this one. It's beautiful dimensional beadwork. All right, guys, that is it for part 1. I hope you guys have enjoyed making the herringbone hoop and embellishing the outer edges. You learned how to sew the two ends together to create a continuous circle. We've added our first part of our bail. If you decided to use a beaded bail there at the top, you go ahead and do that. On this one, I am going to use jump rings. And I'm going to use some gold-filled jump rings. And I love the way this one looks. It looks great on this little cord. But like I said, I want to do something just a little bit different this time. All right, that's it. I hope you have enjoyed this first part of the pendant tutorial. If you were going to make earrings out of yours, you'll want to make 2 of these, obviously, before we move on to the next step. All right, guys. Thank you so much for participating on my membership channel. It means the world to me to know that you guys are willing to help support the Alluring Bead Boutique, the teaching portion of the Alluring Bead Boutique. And have a great day. I'll see you next time.